In the previous exercise, we turned on the reaction block in the autoclave, and we will now add the reactions shown here using the reaction editor. So you'll see we've got 4 reactions where we're leaching the metal oxides with sulfuric acid, and the sulfuric acid is in the aqueous form. So I'll go now to the reaction editor, and you'll remember we came to this editor when we said edit RCT in the previous exercise. So if we look at the reaction editor, in the left-hand window, all of the reactions that are currently in your project will be displayed in this window. And at the moment, we only have one, the autoclave.rct. In the right-hand window, it's a list of all the species in the project. And these are displayed in the order in which they are shown in the project. So you see here we've got vapors, liquids, and solids. So if I move down, we get the whole list of the species there displayed. So to add a reaction, if we click on the button in the middle here, Add Reaction, my windows will change, and I've now got a left-hand side of the reaction where I can put the reactants, then I've got the equals, and then I've got my right-hand side where I can put my products. Now to add any species to these boxes, we can drag them across from the right-hand side from the list of species. So the first one we're looking for is our nickel oxide, which is a solid. So if I go down into the solids group, I can find the nickel oxide here in the list. The other thing we could do is we could turn on the filter here at the bottom. So if I turn on the filter and I said only show me all species that contain nickel in I, and this is case sensitive, then you'll see that makes the list far shorter and it's easier for me to find species that I'm looking for. So if I click on nickel oxide, and I hold down my left mouse button and I drag it across into the reactants and release, and that'll put it there. So nickel oxide on the left, and I want nickel sulfate on the right. So I click on my nickel sulfate and drag it into the right hand side. And now I require sulfuric acid. So I can change my filter now and change it to only show me species that contain H2. And there you can see I've got sulfuric acid aqueous, and I definitely want the aqueous form, not the liquid form. So I click on that, drag that across into the reactants. And I want water in my right hand side. So I want the water liquid, drag it on there. And now that's the reaction, my first reaction. If I click on the balance button, my auto balancer shows me that this reaction is balanced and it hasn't had to make any changes. So I can just click on the OK button. The extent type that I want to use for this reaction is fraction, so I can leave that, I don't have to change that. The species, nickel oxide, by default SysCAD will take the first species in your reactants, but if you click on the arrow, you can change that species. So I could use nickel oxide or sulfuric acid. So just make sure that you're using the right species there, which is nickel oxide in this case. And the extent that we want is 0.95. We can put this value in here, but we can also change it from the access window. The other thing is our heat of reaction. If this is not ticked, then SysCAD will calculate the heat of reaction based on your heat of formation and your specific heat in your species database. If I click on the heat of reaction override, which I'll just do to show you, if I click on that, then you yourself can actually type in the heat of reaction for this reaction in kilojoules per mole or kilojoules per kilogram. But in our case, we want SysCAD to calculate that heat of reaction based on the data in the species database. The enabled means that that reaction is turned on. We could also turn it off here. The status is okay, so it's all balanced and there's no problems with that reaction. So we can go ahead and add our next reaction, which is our cobalt reaction. So again, if I just click on the Add Reaction button, and in my filter, I can go change this now to cobalt. So capital C, small o, cobalt, and there I see my cobalt species. So I'll drag the cobalt oxide to the left side, cobalt sulfate to the right hand side, And now I need my sulfuric acid and my water. So again, change the filter to H2 and grab our sulfuric acid to the left and water to the right. And you'll see that the sulfuric acid and the water are sort of bold blue colors, which means they are used in this reaction. So that's what that color is trying to tell us. If I turn the filter off, so if I got rid of the filter, you'll see the cobalt oxide and the cobalt sulfate, all the species that are used in this reaction are the bold blue. And here you can see the nickel sulfate is bold in black, and that means it is used in this reaction block, but not in this reaction. So that's what those colors are trying to tell you. Because this we can see is balanced, our status is okay, so we don't have to click on the balance button. So we go add a reaction, and this reaction is going to be magnesium. So my filter, I go Mg, and there's my Mg species. So we drag magnesium oxide to the left, magnesium sulfate to the right, and change my filter to H2, and then sulfuric acid to the left, and water to the right. And again, the status is okay. The fraction, magnesium oxide, and I've just left that as the default of 1. I'll go and change that in the actual window of the access window. So the last reaction I want to add is the sodium carbonate. So I'll say add reaction, change my filter to Na. We've got our sodium carbonate solid to the left, sodium sulfate, aqueous to the right hand side. And now if you want, you don't have to drag your species, you can use the autocomplete. If I go here and I say plus, and I can start typing H2, and I could say S, and you can see there's H2SO4 shown there, and if I just double click, it'll add it there. So you don't have to drag the species. If you'd prefer to use the autocomplete functionality, you can do that as well. So if I do that again on here, this time I'm going to want water, so plus H2O this time, and there's my water. If I double click on that, it adds it. And now this time I know I have to add also some carbon dioxide. So plus CO2 gas, and there it is there, double click, and there that reaction is. Now in this case we're not going to leave our extent as fraction. We want to change the extent type. So if I click on this down arrow, and there you can see all the different extent types that you can use, and these are all explained in the help file. We want to use final concentration for this reaction. So I'll click on that, and then the final concentration of which species. It's chosen the default of sodium carbonate, but we actually want it to be sodium sulfate. So if I click on that, and that's in grams per liter, and I can go and I can put this value in now, or I can change it in the access window, but I'll type it in here, 2.75. And if I leave the temperature blank, it will do it at the product temperature of the reaction. So those are my 4 reactions that I've added in, and the status has all been okay. So now I can save. So if I save all of that, and now if I go back into SysCAD, so I'll minimize this reaction editor, and we come back into the autoclave, by default it'll automatically reload our reaction file, and you can see here on the first page my load state is okay. I have no errors in my reaction block. And if I go to the R1 page, it shows me the first reaction in my file. You can see the nickel oxide plus sulfuric acid goes to nickel sulfate plus water. Extent is 95%, which is what I typed in the reaction editor. But here you can see for the cobalt oxide, the extent is 100% because I didn't change the default. So now I can click on the extent and I can change it here to 95%. And if I click OK, you'll see that field is yellow. And what that's telling us is the value that I've typed in here is different to the value in the reaction file itself. It's just a display issue. There's not a problem at all. So the cobalt oxide, I've changed that. And now for the magnesium oxide, which is going to be the third reaction on this page, I must also change my extent to 95%. If I say OK, it's done that. At this point, I'm going to save my project. And in the next exercise, we'll run the project and have a look at what issues you can have with reactions and how to solve them.